Diddy-da-di-di, diddy-di-di-dum. Om. Diddy-di-di-na-da-di. Om. Diddy-di-di-dum. Ay, ay, ay. Ah. Om. Diddy-di-di-dum. Om. Diddy-di-di-na-da-dum. Om. Diddy-di-di-dum. Ay, ay, ay. Ah. With a heavy heart, on a day where many of you, and certainly I, woke up this morning to the horrible news of what took place in Jerusalem. Al ele ani bochia, for these I am crying today, for 4 rabbis who were murdered in the Beit Knesset, in a shul in Har Nof in Jerusalem. Jews praying in a sanctuary, in a safe space, in a house of God. The image of them is before my eyes and makes me heavy with anger, with sadness, with protest, with fear. And so for those, and for the injured, and for those families, we are dedicating today's Lunch and Learn to the memory of those who were killed, murdered this morning. And also, we're also dedicating this learning to hope amidst darkness, that they will find a way somehow, that we will live to see a day where there is peace. We all hold that, I know, in our hearts, and so I'm holding that up this afternoon. We didn't have a learning session last week, so for those of you who are joining us, either for the first time or those of you who are coming back, we've been studying Mesilat Yesharim, the book of the manual of self-development that was written by Romemu Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, Ramchal, who was an 18th century Kabbalist and writer, an author, a prolific author who died very young. He was only 39 when he passed away, but he was, without a doubt, the greatest Kabbalist of his generation, and without a doubt, one of the more unique and creative individuals in Jewish history. In many, as I mentioned in the beginning, in the Hakdama, in the introduction, many scholars attribute perhaps the beginning of a kind of genre of Hebrew literature to the Ramchal, to Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. He wrote not only Kabbalistic and Torah works and works of philosophy, but he also wrote a number of plays. He was from a very wealthy family, very aristocratic family, and he had a very wide-ranging education, and he wasn't just steeped in Kabbalah and the full canon of Jewish literature, but he also had been exposed to other parts of other educational pieces. So we began in the Hakdama, in the introduction, and we've spoken already for a number of weeks on various themes related to the book, what the purpose of the book was, what the Ramchal had in mind when he wrote the Mesilat Yesharim, the Path of the Just. I just want to say one thing here to all of you who are logging on. You know, when I told some of my more, I guess, traditional friends, those who are familiar with this work, those who had either grown up knowing about Mesilat Yesharim or those who had studied it at yeshivot or at some point in their lives, they'd come across the Mesilat Yesharim, and I told them that I was teaching Mesilat Yesharim for lunch and learn at a kind of soul food that we've been doing. And I think the response was, really? I mean, you're really going to be teaching Mesilat Yesharim? And I think that where that incredulity came from was the sense that Mesilat Yesharim is not exactly the way it's taught in yeshivot, or the way that I learned it, or the way that many of us learned it. It wasn't exactly the most spiritually, the most overt spiritual text. It was a text of ethics, of musar, or at least the way that it's been used is that it's a book on ethical perfection, on how to be a better person, and so on, and the importance of being musari, meaning ethical or having good qualities. But I think that what was lost on many of my friends, and certainly was lost on me, when I was studying Mesilat Yesharim, was that I really hadn't taken into account that the Ramchal, the author of the text, is the greatest Kabbalist of his generation, and the oeuvre, the works that he left behind are testimony to his radical mystical approach to the world. He was a mystic, he was a contemplative, he was one who was gifted, according to his own testimony, to the testimony of his students, to automatic speech. He in fact claimed that there was a magid, a kind of angelic presence that would speak from his throat and dictate whole sections of new Zohar, that he actually was getting a download of a new Zohar, a new work of Jewish mystical revelation was coming to him. He claimed to be not only a mystic, but also a prophet of sorts. Maybe perhaps even the Mashiach ben Yosef or Mashiach ben David. There are little elements about him which claim to be the Messiah or the Redeemer. He certainly saw himself in very cosmically significant ways, his work and his teaching. So often that element of the Ramchal's life is lost on those who read this book, because it can be read at a number of different levels, right? It can be read at the level of just ethical and moral perfection, but then you get into a problem, because you'll see, dear viewer, whoever you are, wherever you are, that later on in this book, and whenever we get to later on, could be in a while, a year or so, that the author claimed that you could climb up a ladder that he was laying before you, that he was presenting to you, and you could climb up this ladder of self-perfection and then arrive at verified heights. And the heights are Ruach HaKodesh, which is divine inspiration, that you could become a vessel for prophecy. So it's very hard in the traditional way of reading the Mesilat Yesharim, of this work that we're studying together. It's very difficult to read it in non-mystical ways once you get to the higher regions. The beginning of the book is, as you'll see in a couple of months, is very much focused on moment-to-moment self-development, kind of very basic do's and don'ts. But then it becomes much deeper. And I think that that's the case, not just in terms of the higher rungs on the ladder, but also even within each rung. It's possible to read each of these moments in this book with a contemplative eye, or an eye of the heart. So we were in the beginning of, we were in the introduction, the beginning of the book, and we had already discussed thus far that the Ramchal made a claim. The Ramchal makes a claim that he hasn't come to teach us anything new, that he's essentially teaching us something that's so obvious and clear to us that we've forgotten about it because of its obviousness, because it's so bolate, it's so obvious, it's so clear, it's so readily accessible. The truths that he's about to lay before us are the kinds of truths that we forget, not because they're difficult to remember, but because they're so ubiquitous, they're so obvious that we forget about them because they're right in front of us. And we discussed how that we can understand that on a number of different levels. On the level of historical truth, it could be that the Ramchal was speaking to people who he was speaking to a kind of religious crowd. And once people are already within the religious system, right, they'd already bought into the religious system. There were already people who are within the Jewish religious framework. They were going to temple, or at least you asked any of them, hey, is going to temple important 3 times a day for the men, or doing all kinds of religious rituals? You know, the Ramchal is living in a pre-Enlightenment world. He's not up against those who are shirking or who are walking away from Jewish life. He's talking to people who are bought in. And for those people, to some degree, he's absolutely right to say that, hey, you all know that all of this is not just about keeping mitzvot, about religious ritual observance, but about something much broader, much deeper. And your average person in the religious world, even today, right? If I was teaching this text to already bought in religious Jews, you say to them, hey, do you think that keeping Shabbat is about keeping Shabbat, or is it pointing towards something much broader, much bigger, much more important? They would all say, yeah, of course. I'm not just keeping these things day in and day out because, for the sake of X, Y, or Z. They'd say, yeah, there's a religious value that's called loving God or being in awe of the mystery of God that's already in the system. And so the Ramchal, in saying it's obvious, is saying to those people, hey, you all forget about how important loving God is and being in awe of the mystery of God. You forget about it because it's so obvious. It's in the Bible. You're reading it every week in shul. So you're just going through your rote motions. But what is it really all about, right? What's it really all about? And so the Ramchal is, in a certain sense, polemically speaking to the various people who are going to pick up this book and say to them, how do you expect, right, to love God if you keep forgetting about how important it is because it's so obvious to you, right? It's so, you say it's so obvious to us, but you don't spend any time on it. It's just so obvious that that's what's the whole religious system is about. I think the deeper connection for me here, even if those of you who are watching or who will watch at some point aren't Jewish per se, spiritual practitioners, whatever your spiritual leaning is, the Ramchal is speaking a very deep truth, which is that your true nature, your deep nature as a child of God is also obvious. And in some ways, we forget that miracle of who we are because it's so obvious often that we don't think that we have to try to remember it. And that all of this book is, in a sense, trying to create practices and strategies for remembering what you already know in a deep place, but that you forget because, again, it's so simple, it's so clear, it's one breath away. But how many of us can stay in that one breathness, in that moment of connection with Hashem, with God, with spirit, with the heart? We get so busy with our lives, and we get so busy with the millions of breaths that we're going to take, and the millions of projects that we're involved in, that we forget about that place. And the Ramchal in this introduction is saying to us, if you don't work hard to remember what's simple, it won't happen by itself. And that's where we were. For those of you who have the text in front of you, we're really staying in the text. And so we left off on page 6 and 7, page 6 and 7, which is on the PDF that hopefully some of you have clicked on that link and have opened it up. And the Ramchal in the text, we're going to go back to a little bit of what we studied last week, and then we'll go forward. On the top of page 6, the Ramchal wrote that the various states of awareness and various states of consciousness and the various qualities of character traits that are available to us, that we don't have to work hard to know, are like Shena, sleeping, and Yekitza, awakening, Ra'av ve'asova, like the hunger and being sated, the Chol Sha'ar Tnuot HaChakukot B'Tiv'einu, all of the other movements or behaviors that are natural to us. We are born, each and every one of us, with an inclination, a natural inclination to, we don't need to learn how to sleep. We don't need, although don't say that to parents who are in the midst of sleep training, right? But we sleep naturally, we wake up naturally. We know we are hungry naturally, and we're sated naturally. All of those things are chakukot, they're embedded within our nature. But he says that more refined human qualities require us to employ means and strategies in order to acquire them. We talked about this last week, that there are plenty of things that in some way, if they don't point towards our evolution, but points towards our devolution. There are things in the world that actually can keep us from growing. There are impediments that can get in the way. And there's no shortage of those things either. The Ramchal says that we are situated in a world where there are certain physical and natural inclinations that are part of our natural unfolding. And you can include that also with that in that category, even rationality and other qualities that are ingrained in us. They're biologically imprinted on us. They are what Ken Wilber called the unconscious non-emergent or unemergent. Like, we don't need particular strategies in order to acquire certain cognitive skills that Piaget and others map out, right? Those things, they emerge, right, at the appropriate time, at the appropriate conditions, right? We have available to us other dimensions of our mind and other dimensions of our bodies. These things are emerging and they are developing. But becoming a mensch, becoming a person who is aware of social cues or how to behave appropriately, those things require tachbulot, strategies. And I think the Ramchal is going to argue, sorry, there, I had to close the door. The Ramchal is going to argue that those qualities are just the tip of the iceberg, because higher levels of development, higher levels of spiritual and intellectual development require tachbulot. They require stratagems and we need to be wily. We have to be able to figure out how to avoid the things that pull us down, and how to let loose the innate potentialities that we have and bring them to fruition. So he says, "V'lo yachsaru drachim lachik mafsidehem, im kein efo ech lo yitztarech leotzi zman al ha'iyun hazeh, ladat amitat hadvarim v'ladat haderech liknosam u'lekaimam, me'ayin devar chachma zos v'lev ha'adam im lo yivakshena." He says, if this is the case, that these things require wisdom, they require effort, they require energy, they require stratagems, they require all kinds of wiles for us to build ourselves the potential for unfolding. How is it possible that we don't spend time, the Ramchal writes, directing our energies and our attention towards thinking deeply on how this works, right? We go to 4 years of school for BA, and then we go to school for law or for medicine or for all the different schools that we have. We have a whole slew of schools and educational models. But do we have educational models for spiritual development? How do you get a BA in spiritual development? How do you get a PhD in spiritual development? And I always wondered in yeshivas, like they taught me how to learn Gemara. They taught me how to read the Rambam, Maimonides. They taught me how to learn the Rishonim, the early commentators who lived in the Middle Ages. They taught me how to read the Achronim, the later commentaries. But who taught me how to be calm? Who taught me how to be punctilious? Who taught me how to watch my thoughts so that I don't get caught in thoughts that are not productive? Where was that agenda? Where was that schooling? And so it wasn't until really the agenda, the Ramchal certainly is part of this revolution, but of course it reaches its apex with Chassidut, with the Baal Shem Tov, and then with the Musar movement, with Rav Yisrael Salanter, that there was more of a turn towards the interior, towards the who's going to help us become real Chassidim, real saints, right? How do you become enlightened? That's the question. And if you don't spend time thinking about it, how is it possible that it won't just happen, right? You're not just going to wake up one morning, although there are stories about that too, but for the most part, you're not going to wake up in the morning and know how to be a God lover unless you've actually given it thought about how to avoid some of the pitfalls that get in the way, right? וכיוון שכבר התעמד אצל כל חכם צורך תמימות העבודה וחובת טהרתה וניקיונה, שזולת אלה אינן נרצס ודאי כלל, אלא נמאסס ומסואבס ככל לבבו זורש השם וכל יצר מחשבוס הוא מבין, מה נענה ביום התוכחה, אם התרשלנו מן העיון הזה ודיחקנו דבר שהוא כל כך מוטל עלינו, שהוא עיקר מה השם אלוקינו שואל ממנו. He says, how is it possible for us to spend all of our time, once it's already been clear to us that we need to actually look into the matter and become spiritual archaeologists or spiritual adventurers or spiritual PhDs? We need systems. How is it possible that we spend, what are we going to answer, so to speak, at the end of our lives when we look back at the panorama of our lives, if we didn't spend the time required to know this matter deeply, and that we were lazy or in our or negligent in something that is such a deep responsibility that each of us has. And he says in the line, "Ma'ikar Hashem Elokeinu sho'el mi'imanu," which is the ikar, the essence of what God, what spirit, what is being asked of us in this incarnation, right? That, by the way, is a reference here to the Chazal that says, "Ma Hashem Elokeinu sho'el mi'imanu," that God is asking us to have a little bit of that awareness. That when Moses says, "Ma Hashem Elokecha sho'el mi'imach," God is asking for that. He's asking for us to be that kind of evolved spirit, to be polished in that way. הייתכן שיגע ויעמוד שכלנו וחקירות אשר לא התחייבנו בם, פיפולים אשר לא יצא ממנו שום פרי מהם, מדינים אשר אינם שייכים לנו, ומה שחייבים אנו לבוראנו חובה רבה נעזר להרגל ונניחהו למצוות אנשים מלוא מדע. Such a great line. He says, is it possible that we will busy ourselves and will be miyagea or amel, will work hard and diligently, our minds, our intellects, with analyses that were not required of us, and pilpulim, sophistries, right? Fruitless argumentation that doesn't produce a fruit, and laws that are not shayachim lanu, that aren't relevant to us, and the obligation, the responsibility that we have to our Creator. That's something that we'll abandon it, and we'll leave it to rote observance, or we'll even let it rest for those who just go through the motions, right? That's for those religious folks who are crazy, who want to be devotees, or they're new age freaks. Right? I'm always amazed when people come to Romemu and say that what's happening at Romemu is new age, because I'm not exactly sure what they're talking about. We don't have any crystals. We don't have incense burning. There's nobody running around doing, I don't even know what New Age is per se. But what we do at Romemu is we pray with heart, and people are moved to dance in their bodies and express themselves religiously and ecstatically. It's too out there for some people. But what does that mean exactly? And the Ramchal is part of that polemic against a kind of religious, it's too sophisticated for people to actually get involved. The Ramchal says, you spend all of your day, he was being critical of sitting and learning Talmud all day about laws that have to do with the temple. The temple's been destroyed for 2,000 years, and you spend all of your time religiously in the mind doing all kinds of very creative academic approaches to Torah. But what about the academic approach to the heart or to the soul? Who's going to do that work? And if no one's going to do that work, no one who actually brings the full weight of their intellectual and capacities, then of course loving God will be seen as new agey, or loving God will be seen as something that's for simpletons, or for people who don't take things seriously, who aren't intellectually worth engaging. I think that the story about Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had a choice because he was such a brilliant prodigy, and there came a point in time when he had a choice before him whether to go to Mezrich and to learn with the Maggid, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, or he could make his way to Lita, to Vilna, to study with the Vilna Gaon and the students of the Vilna Gaon, two different centers, one of devotion to God through the heart and through ecstasy and through Chassidut, and one devotion to God through learning and through the mind. And he decided to go to the Maggid, and they asked him why. He said, well, I wanted to learn. I know how to learn already. I know how to study. I don't know how to pray. I want to watch the Maggid tie his shoelaces. So here is the Ramchal himself, a towering genius intellectually, who was one of the most sophisticated and organized minds of his generation, right? He was encyclopedic in his knowledge of Torah, and organized. And here he is making a case for applying that same intellectual sophistication to studying the science of God, the science of love, the science of how it is to be a devotee, right? And that is it possible, he says, for us to relinquish and to relegate that responsibility to those who are just by road, who aren't bringing the full intellectual weight, while we busy ourselves with things that we're not really obligated to do, right? And it's a really deep religious question. I think whether you're a religious Jew, a religious Muslim, or an atheist, right? What is ultimately the kind of, if we admit, as Sam Harris has written in his book, Waking Up, that I referenced, that there are the capacities to love and to nourish compassion and to grow in empathy, all of those things that can be trained. How is it that we don't train ourselves in those things, right? If we admit that those things are really the paragon of what it is to be a human being, is to be a loving, compassionate individual, and those things can be taught, why aren't we studying those things? Like, why are we spending our time, or how much time do we devote? If we were to make a list of, like, we should have a time budget for life. So if I spend, in my line items on, in my line item for the year, I have 25 movies at 3 hours a clip. That's 75 hours a year watching cinema. Can I say honestly that I've spent 75 hours a year working on loving? I mean, it's a good question. Loving ourselves, loving other, loving God, loving spirit. And how would we know what techniques, what tools, what schools to apply to, right? And if our children grow up in a world where we assume that love is something that our parents should give us, but that we don't grow in love after we've left the home, we just spend all of our time in the world making money or trying to put food on the table, which of course is valuable. But the Ramchal is going to quote a verse that says, "Im tivakshena kakesef," if you seek love of God as you do money, or if we would seek love of or compassion for the world the way that we seek those things, then maybe the world will look slightly different. Now, of course, if I were in a classroom now, some of you might be putting up your hand and saying, well, that's all well and good, David, but as Maslow pointed out in his pyramid of needs, in his hierarchy of needs, existential needs are on the top of the pyramid, and the baseline needs are what's most paramount. You can't think about God when you're trying to put food on the table, right? Good question. Good question. So I'm speaking to people who have a choice about how much work to put in or how much time in leisure. And we need to devote time to developing our love muscles. And by that, I don't mean anything new age. I mean this muscle right here, the heart, the capacity to love the other and to have compassion for the other. So says the Ramchal, Halo tishkach, excuse me, one second. If we don't do this kind of inquiry, what is true yirah, really? What does it mean when we say that we're in awe of the mystery of life of God? And what are its branches? How will we acquire it? And how will we avoid the worldly vanity which renders our hearts forgetful of it? Meaning, life will pull us away from that deep inquiry. הלא תשכח ותלך אף על פי שידענו חובתה. אבל כמו כן, אם לא נשתדל לקבוע אותה בלבבנו בכוח, כל האמצעים המגיעים אותנו לזה, איך נמצא בנו מאין יבוא הדבקות וההתלהטות בנפשותנו עמו יתברך ועם תורתו, אם לא נשאל גדולתו ואל רוממותו אשר יוליד בלבנו הדבקות הזה, איך תדהר מחשבתנו אם לא נשתדל לנקותה מן המומין שמטיל בה הטבע הגופני, והמידות כולם מצריכות כמו כן תיקון וישרה. מי ישרם ומי יתקנם אם לא נשים לב עליהם, לא נדקדק בדבר דקדוק גדול. He says, listen, if we don't think about who that being is, what that mystery is, if we don't have a practice of asking the question of what is God, where is God, who is God, and have that build within us an inquiry for so many things that we've either assumed or taken for granted, or we've inherited, or we just don't have time thinking about. if we don't have a practice of really asking those kinds of questions and then sitting with the answers and then developing that muscle, he's asking, where's it going to come from, right? If I ask you, you know, where is your love of God going to come from? He said, well, if I contemplate for a moment, and by contemplation, I don't mean sitting in Zen. I mean just asking myself, like, who's the source of this moment? What is the source of this? What is the miracle of the givenness of this moment? Of anything, of any moment. If I don't look into the relationship between reality and God, the giver, that would develop within me an appreciation and a gratitude and a love for that being, where will it come from? That's what he wants to know. And like that, he says also our personal midot, our character traits, they all require work. They all require practices. So the Ramchal, I just want to stop here for a moment. The Ramchal essentially is saying life is no different than our physical life. Our physical life requires exercise in order to keep the muscles firm and fit. We need to exercise in order to have our heart rate go up and to be healthy. And spiritual life also needs exercises, spiritual exercises. Davening can be, of course, a way that I am doing my Jewish thing because God said I should do it. It can also be a practice that when I do the practice called davening or prayer, I'm working out. And it's that shift of frame which the Ramchal wants us to think about. He then says, הלא אם עיינו על הדבר עיון אמיתי, היינו מוצאים אותה למיתו ומטיבים לעצמנו ומלמדים אותו לאחרים, מטיבים גם להם גם כן. If we looked into it, the way that we seek for money, and the way that we are really, we have a deep commitment to searching, right? Then we will find what is called Yirat Adonai, the fear of God, which we have to say here means the awe of the mystery of divine existence, the mystery, an awareness of that mystery, an appreciation for that mystery, to quote Heschel, right? The wonder. Yirat Hashem is, how will we acquire wonder if we don't actually work at wondering? Right? Be wandering or wondering Jews, as Abby Poggeman said, wondering Jews. And he then says in the end of the verse that he quotes, the verse in Proverbs says, if you seek it as silver and you search for it like treasure, then you'll understand the fear of God. But he says, it doesn't say, then you will understand philosophia. Then you will understand tchuna, meaning astronomy. Or then you will understand az tavin refuah, az tavin dinim, az tavin halachot. Then you'll understand medicine. Then you'll understand law, or then you'll understand halakha, Jewish law. But az tavin yirat Hashem, then you will have this fear of God, which means then you will be able to call forth wonder. If you want to know what yirah, or seeing, right, that divine reality, you need to seek it like you would seek money or silver. Search it out like treasure. All of this is part of what our heritage teaches and what all of us accept, right? We get it. Every devout person gets it. And then he's going to go on a little bit more, right? To, in a sense, say that do we have time for all of the other, right, for all of the branches of study and none for this study? Again, more of this, more of the Ramchal, taking us to page 10, where he quotes the verse in Devarim 10, that I quoted earlier. What does God ask of you? I hope you found me in the English. What is God? Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you, but that you fear God, to walk in God's ways, and to love God and serve God with all of your heart, all of your soul, to observe the mitzvot of God. Kan kalal kol chelkei shlemut avodah hanirtzeit lishmo yitbarach v'hem hayirah halicha b'drachav ahava shlemut alev ushmirat kol mitzvot. Right, so we're going to go through each of these, God willing, next week, and continue through the introduction. He says that there are basically, in this verse from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, there are five elements that are, in a sense, all of our spiritual work can be grouped into these 5 groups. Yirah, which means fear of God, which again will translate here as wonder or awareness of the majesty of the divine. Halicha v'drachav, meaning imitatio Dei, following God's ways. Loving God. Shleimut alev, which means wholeheartedness, and shmirat kol mitzvot, which means an observance of these spiritual practices called mitzvot. These are where the Ramchal leaves us. So I want to leave us now today with a tefillah, with a prayer, and a hope. I want to pray. Source of life. May the learning for the last half hour that we have engaged in, and that those who have taken from their time during their busy days to express their yearning for connection to you, may this learning be Le'ilui Nishmas, for the elevation of the souls of those 4 individuals who were murdered today, and for a healing for those who were wounded. And may also this learning open our hearts and the hearts of all those whom we are with to want to know more about how to connect to you, to the source of life, to the mother, to the father of all creation. You are a mother, you are a father, you are Yidid Nefesh, you are all of these things. And I pray that today's learning opens our hearts to have great compassion and to be able to feel deeply into what needs to be done to make this world a better place, to make this world a holier place. May God bless each and every one of us with a deep yearning to seek wisdom, to seek practices and strategies that can help us stay centered in a place of open receptivity to the wonder of God's world. And we pray together for an end to all violence and all conflict wherever it is. And through this power of prayer, which is itself an expression of a deep hope, we hope and pray that especially in the land of Israel, which is so full of pain and anger now at this moment, that there be a way out of a cycle of violence, a way towards peace, a way towards living together, a new way. And Or Chadash al Tzion Ta'ir, we pray for a new light to shine on Zion. And may all of us, B'nizkeh Chulanu Mehera Le'oro, may all of us see it soon. Amen. V'chein yhi ratzon. Blessings to everyone for a day of peace.